No
Well,
problem.
good afternoon, everyone. So I just wanted to give you a general overview of our practices in the United States as we identify our gifted and talented students. And now it's not forwarding. There we go. Okay, this is me. I'm Connie Brown. I am 34 years a public educator in the United States, and I taught mostly English and language arts, but I was also a theater arts curriculum instructor, and I have a master's degree in curriculum and instruction. I became a gifted and talented specialist about 20 years ago, and I was a lead facilitator in a gifted and talented school, middle school, for 10 years. I also speak quite a lot for parent groups, and I have an upcoming book called From Socrates to STEAM, Student Agency Fuels Potential. So talking about gifted secondary services in the United States, we basically have three general areas that we're going to talk about tonight. And one is identification, the other is academic programming, and the third is extensions and enrichment to provide for our students to help them reach their greatest potential. It's important to understand that the United States, like all of these little spots, are different states in the United States. And our government believes that every educational decision should be left directly to each state. So each of these boxes represents a different set of rules around how gifted identification and services are provided for students. We do know that discrepancies still exist based on economic class in the United States, but discrepancies also exist just based on location. So I'm going to give you my experience as a gifted educator, and I have taught in 3 different states, but I wanted to give that caveat that the rules are different in different states. They don't vary tremendously, and we do try to base, all states try to base their practices on this gifted educational standards. And I've put a link in here twice so that you can look at those. They're quite extensive, so I'm not going to go over each one of them tonight, but I will pull up a few of them as we go through. So the first area is identification, and our students need to be identified for gifted services. And we have several ways to do this, but the general assumption in the United States is that assessments should be provided for students so that we can determine if they have gifts and talents, and they should be provided as early as possible. In my state, we do universal screening for every second grader. So at about the age of 7, every child in our district and in our state should be taking a universal screener. For us, it's usually the COGAT, the Cognitive Abilities Test. This is true in many states. In some states, it doesn't happen until 3rd grade. And in some states, there is not universal testing. Also, we want every school to have students who are identified with gifts and talents to represent diverse backgrounds. So we should have the same proportion of students identified as gifted and talented as we do of different economic classes and different ethnicities within the school. We never, in the United States, it's generally a rule that we don't believe that one test or one data point should identify a student. We always want to use a broad body of evidence with at least 3 different data points. So one of those data points is cognitive, and that would be, for example, the cognitive assessment test, or the NNET is the Naglieri nonverbal ability test. The WIPSI is a Wechsler test that's used for pre-K and actually students up to 7 years old. And then the WISC-5 is also a Wechsler test. These are more of IQ tests, whereas the cognitive and the NNAT are not IQ tests, but they do indicate cognitive ability. The second area that we use for data points, we always want some achievement data. So we use pretty frequently the MAP test, which is the measure of academic progress out of the Northwest Evaluation Association, NWEA. This is a test that students are given annually, actually several times in a school year, to determine if they're making academic progress. And if we see great divergence there, we tend to go back and re-examine that student to see if they have other data points that indicate that they may be gifted. We have state tests that are given annually, every year now in I think every state. And then of course the college entrance exams, the ACT and the SAT and the PSAT, are generally available to students as early as 6th or 7th grade. So they can start taking those and we can use them as identifiers. Someone had asked earlier, and I'm going to go ahead and address the question now, if the AMC test would be valuable for getting into middle or high school in the United States. And my answer to that, it would depend on the school, and you'd want to ask the schools that you're interested in. But generally speaking, the AMC is pretty new in the United States, and only in the last few years have we started to see sort of our top colleges even asking for that data. It certainly would be a great piece to put into a portfolio if your child has already taken the test. I would not stress heavily, particularly for grades 6 through 12, before they even are headed toward college. I wouldn't stress heavily on trying to get your child to take that test early, as specifically as a means to get into private school in the United States. But if they have taken the test and they've got a good score, definitely share that information. The third tool for identification is just observational. So we have the scales for identifying gifted students, that's the SIGs. These are just observational charts that teachers and parents can complete about their child's behaviors. Other things that we use, and these are used across the board. These are used at schools like the Davidson Institute for gifted students, or the early college at Guilford, but juried portfolios where the student has collected their work, syllabi from classes that they might take outside of school, or advanced classes that they took in school, any artwork that they've done, photographs of projects that they've created. This would be, and we'll talk more about the portfolio as we go through, but that's a pretty important piece for almost all applications for gifted centers. And then a state or national ranking in any area also can identify a student for a gifted identification. And that's often used. We'll talk about these 3 different or 4 different pathways in a moment. And so if a student, for example, gets even a state or a national ranking as an ice skater or a pianist or a violinist, that becomes a data point that we would use for identification. So I'll talk about how we use these different tools as we move forward. There are generally, at least in my state, and I think in several states, well, I know in several states, 4 different pathways that we might identify a student. One is just for general intellectual ability. One is for a specific academic aptitude, such as math or writing. One is for specific talent aptitudes, such as athletics or art. And one is for, is called Pathway 4, and that's for students who are identified as twice exceptional. These are students who may have a gift in one area and then still have a learning disability, like a processing speed disorder or a dyslexic disorder, or even now, and we'll get to it in a minute, in the United States, we're starting to look at students who have acquired, who have English as a second language. It's a disadvantage, and so we can look at those students for pathway 4 as well. So the first 3 pathways with the general intellectual ability, we want to see a 95th percentile or higher on a normed cognitive test, and then a 95th percentile or higher on 2 achievement data points, and then 1 behavioral observation. For the specific academic aptitude, we want a body of evidence that includes any 3 normed scores at the 95th percentile or higher. So this might be achievement or observation or cognitive. And then the specific talent aptitude, again, we're definitely looking for that portfolio, that 95th percentile on a cognitive test or an observational scale. Under this specific talent, it doesn't have to be both. And then that student who is ranked nationally or even at their local state could identify in this category for specific talent aptitude. One of the things that the National Association or Alliance for Gifted Children really emphasizes is that all students with gifts and talents, including those who may be twice exceptional or English language learners, or who come from an underrepresented population in our country, that would be an economic disadvantage, must receive equal opportunities to be identified and served in high quality programming as a result of their educators who are guided by ethical practices. And because of that, we have this pathway 4 where we can use several combinations of this. So for example, if we see this 95th percentile on a normed cognitive test, or even on an observational scale, then we can maybe waive the high achievement data, because maybe this is a student who's not going to have high achievement data in writing in English, for example. So, so that 95th percentile that like initially identifies the student, again, either on a cognitive test or an observational scale, we've got a documented disadvantage, whether it's economics or language or a learning disability, then we can waive the high achievement data if the other data suggests that that's what we need to do. And I think that, Ming, is the end of that first section, if you wanted to translate here.
Yeah, thank you very much, Connie. 因为我们参加这个考试的参加今天分享的这个家长可能更习惯听一些中文的解释。我呢在每一部分结束的时候都花2到3分钟的时间，把Connie老师刚才讲的这一个内容呢进行一个简单的翻译。这样的话呢，就是便于后面我们提问的时候一个更顺畅的一个交流。其实刚才康妮老师也提到了，就是说关于这个在美国呢，它的这个自由生教育发展，或者是项目的提供，或者说学术的规划，一般是分为3个大的部分。第一个大的部分呢，就是认定自由生的认定；第二个部分呢就是给自由生提供什么样的学术的项目；第3个呢，就是说这个自由生有哪些可以进行延伸学习，或者是进行深入学习的这样的一些资源和机会。那首先第一部分呢，讲的就是这个自由生的这个认定的问题。其实在美国呢，它是各个州来决定自己本州的这样的一个自由生的认定还有项目的提供，不同的州和不同的州也不太一样。这个呢要跟各个州的经济发展水平，或者是根据它地域不同的特点来进行分别。但是整体上来讲，他们遵循的原则和规则都是由这个美国自由生教育委员会他们出的一个整体的大纲作为一个基础。那我们再说到这个自由生的这个认定这个方面，自由生的认定呢，它也是同样的，在整体来讲，在Connie老师所在的州科拉多多州呢，它是一般在2年级，也就是孩子大概在7岁左右的时候，就会进行一个全部孩子的进行一个就是进行一个评估，看看哪些孩子是自由生的孩子。然后不同州，有的州是在3年级开始，这个但是基本上都会有一个全州的这样的一个筛查，或者是叫评估。那在评估一个学生的时候呢，往往不是通过某一个测试来确定的，它一般呢是有3个部分。 分，这3个部分呢，就是刚才提到的，一个是 cognitive 是认知认知能力的一个情况，还有个 achievement 是学术能力的情况，还有一个是 observational 是通过他观察他的整体的这个表现来进行确定的。那比如说在cognitive 认知能力测试的时候，他们一般看的这个测试呢，用的最多的就是 COGAT 剩之外的还有像 NNAT WPPSI 还有 WSC 这个不同的测试了，这个都是关于认知能力测试的。还有呢，就一部分呢就是通过学术能力测试，学术能力测试用的最多的就是 MAP 测试，当然这里面也包括州的不同的这个 test，不同的这个州的一个州立的一个测试，包括还有的就是 ACT、PSAT 和 SAT。第3个部分呢，就是他们整个的一个观察的这样的一个情况，包括有需要老师和家长来配合的叫 SIX 的这样的一个量表，或者说呢，他们也会让孩子提供一个整个的就是能够证明孩子的这样的一个不同的文件的一个组合，他们综合来判断，或者呢，就是说在州和国家的不同类型的比赛或大赛中取得的名次，这个呢，往往是比如说孩子在比如说是在滑冰，或者是说在这个音乐方面有特殊的才能的，他们会综合这3个方面的因素来判断这个孩子是不是一个自由生，或者适合什么样的自由生的项目。其中呢，他们看的比较多的呢，也刚才我们提到的这几个方面里面，第一部分就是说，首先是他的这个智力情况就是这个如何来判断他的智力呢？一般的情况就是在认知能力测试，比如说像 COGAT 要达到95%以上，或者是说他们呢，这个其中有1项它是95以上，然后其他的有2项的这个学术能力的测试是超过了95或者呢，他也可以通过行为表现的方式来看这个孩子他的智力的一个超常的一个情况。另外呢，就是关于他的具体的学术能力方面，他这个学术能力的观察呢，也是包括有3个部分的内容，也都是要超过95%以上的。你比如说刚才我们提到的 MAP test 这种情况，还有呢，就是在某一方面有特殊的才能，刚才我们也提到了，就是或者说在某一个科目上，他的这个分数超过了95，或者他也可能是刚才一直我们在提到的一个专业的概念叫 twice exceptional， 就是指的它是双重的特殊特别。一方面呢，就是在某一方面的能力特别强就是就比如说是在艺术方面比较有天分，但是同时在另一方面呢，就是需要提高，就比如说有阅读障碍，像这种情况呢，同样是在美国的自由生的教育里面也是会被重视的一个群体。这就说回来，美国的整个这个自由生教育它是经过立法，而且呢，它要给这种每个州，它要给自由生的孩子提供的这种学术的或者说这个项目的帮助，包括一个是在整个方面或者某个方面有突出贡献的，包括刚才我们提到的 twice exceptional， 就是一方面非常强，一方面又相对弱的，这些情况下都需要把这些孩子给进行评估出来，然后给这些孩子提供相应的高质量的这样的学术项目，也是由各个州或者是美国现在正在做的这样的一个自由生的项目。而且呢，就是刚才康林老师也补充了一点，就是在自由生的评定或认定的方面呢，我们经常是也不会为某一项标准来确定，而是它要综合来判断不同的这样的一个评判信息，最后能够确定一个自由生孩子的他的情况以及适合什么样的项目。So yeah, that's my brief translation for you. So Connie, please go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I wanted to take a few minutes just to help all of the parents understand how to look at the COGAT. I mean, if we have our child take such an extensive test, it seems important that it provides information for not just teachers, but also parents. So I wanted to just quickly go through, some of this you may already know, but some of it may be new. So the cognitive abilities test is made of 3 different batteries, 3 sections. And the first section is the verbal battery. The second is the quantitative, and the third is the nonverbal. And then within each battery, there are 3 sections. So in verbal, there's classification, sentence completion, and analogies. And then in quantitative, you've got number series, number puzzles, and number analogies. And then in nonverbal, there's figure classification, paper folding, and figure matrices. So I'm going to talk about each one very briefly, but just enough to maybe help you understand how to make sense of the COGAT report when it comes in. When a COGAT report comes in, this is what the left side of the test would look like. And we're going to talk about sections 1, 2, and 5. The section 3 would be on the right side, and I took it off because I didn't want to give away identifying information, but it would just have notes from the company on what to do, or some ideas for helping your child. But this first section, let's look at that first. This is a close-up of it. So we've got the 3 different battery areas, and then we have an age stay 9. This is a 9-point score that just sort of helps us see like where your child tested based on other students their age. So 9 would be the highest. 8 and 9 are generally considered quite high. 4 to 7 are considered average, and then below 4 is considered below average. And then this is their percentile rank, their age percentile rank. This is how they scored compared to, in this case, here's 94% of the students who took the test scored less effectively than this student. And here, 99% scored less effectively in this schedule, in this area than this student. And I like that they have this nice little graph so that you can see it. So this bottom score is a composite score, and it just says overall. However, when we are identifying students, we rarely work with the composite score, and we work more with these battery scores. The verbal battery assesses a student's vocabulary efficiency and their verbal memory. And I realize now that I used pictures from an elementary level test, and I want people to know that the secondary tests for students who are grades 6 and above really relies on vocabulary. It's not just pictures. And so I personally think that makes the test a little bit more difficult, particularly for a student who has a language barrier. But it does assess a student's ability to determine word relationships if they have strong vocabulary. The quantitative battery is an understanding of basic number concepts and relationships that are essential for learning mathematics, but it's important to understand that the quantitative does not measure computational math skills. This is about understanding relational concepts and the student's ability to discover relationships. What I have found, and I've given hundreds of these tests, I've administered hundreds of these tests, and what I find so interesting is that if one compared the verbal battery to the quantitative battery, there's a very clear pattern of how, number analogies versus vocabulary analogies, and number puzzles versus sentence completion. It's quite interesting how that works, but it's important to understand this is not about computation. And the nonverbal battery measures reasoning using pictures and geometric shapes. The idea is that this would reduce the impact of language on a student's score. And it does to some extent if you have a second language student who has a nonverbal strength. If you have a second language student who has a verbal strength, then that's why it's so important to go back to the portfolio and the multiple data points when trying to identify a student. But the nonverbal battery is about understanding spatial awareness and making predictions on spatial awareness. So this is the second part of the test that I showed you a little bit ago. So just to read this tells us how many items were in this battery. There are 54 items in this battery, and this student attempted all 54 problems. This is an important number because many students don't do that. Many students will attempt 40 out of the 54, and that is significant because we want to know why didn't they attempt more. So it's important to kind of keep that in mind as you're reading it as a parent. And then here are the numbers correct for each section. This student actually attempted all of the questions on each battery. But again, I've given hundreds of these tests and I've scored hundreds of them, and you'd be amazed at how many students don't attempt them all. So here you then see that grade stay 9. This is again how this student compares to other students in their same grade level across all the students who took this test. And then here are their percentiles. Remember that the percentile is not the percentage of correct answers. It's where that student falls in the, this number represents how many students scored less than the child who took this test. So 93% of the students who took this test did not score as well as this student did. And then the last section, this number 5, I wanted to point this out. There's a little bolded number down here. And I find this to be very helpful for teachers and parents. This is a profile example. So it shows us that this student overall scored a 7, which is slightly in the higher average. It's not above average, but it's in the higher average of their age group. The profile of C means that there's a contrast, which means this student had some strength some battery that scored significantly higher than another section of the test. And so you would go back and look at those scores. And then here it tells us if they had a verbal strength or a quantitative strength, and they'd put a plus next to it. So because this student had a contrast, it would have, let's say, a verbal plus and a quantitative minus. And that just tells you that this student's relative strength was verbal and the relative weakness was quantitative. And that becomes important here when we get to programming. So I'll tell you about that in a minute. I also wanted you to see that if this letter had been A, it means that they're pretty much the same as their classmate, or their test scores are pretty much the same across the board. Or if it was a B, it would have been that that their scores were above or below their classmates. The C indicates the contrast within that student's test scores. And the extreme, the E, would mean that there was plus or minus 24 points between two tests. And that sometimes, not always, but sometimes can indicate a disability or a disadvantage. And that is the end of that section.
Okay, thank you so much, Connie. So I would like to give you some brief translation about the COGAT test part. 刚才呢，就是 Connie 老师呢介绍了一下，就是关于在美国使用最多的这个 COGAT test。这个 COGAT test 呢是一个认知能力测试，它一般包括3个部分。这3个部分呢分别为 verbal 是语言，quantitative 数学 ，non-verbal 呢是空间演绎推理。这3个大的部分里面又包括3个小的部分，它分别都是测试的孩子的这样的一个在不同这3个方面和9个小项里面不同的这样的一个能力。刚才给大家举的例子呢，好的都是图片，其实从3年级以上呢开始都是文字。也就是说，如果其实主要考察还是在词汇认知，还有就是发现词汇之间的逻辑关系的这样一个能力啊。当然，如果孩子的词汇量不够的话，肯定会影响到最后的这样的一个测试成绩。在这个数学里面呢，它考察的是孩子的能够发现数字，或者是数字和数学概念之间的这样的逻辑关系，它本身不考计算能力。然后在这个 non-verbal， 也就是空间演绎推理里面呢，它是通过图形还有几何图形来看孩子的这种空间演绎能力。在这个过程当中呢，就是大家还看到有个整个的后面的 COGAT test 报告，现在停留在屏幕上呢，其实我们把它翻译成叫COGAT 给孩子的个人能力画像。它这个其中这个7，就是刚才看到前面咱们讲的时候是它的一个9分制。一般呢给出来的这个9分制里面呢，8到9就属于比较就是 高的，然后4到7呢属于这个平均水平，然后3级以下呢属于这种低于平均水平的这个情况。然后这个 C 它给出来的这个概念呢是指的，它不是说 ABCD 的那个 C， 它是指的 contrast， 就是有两个部分呢是一个高一个低，后面这个括弧里面 V 加 Q 减的意思呢，就是在 verbal 语言这部分呢它是比较高的，在 quantitative 数学这部分比较弱的。然后其中特别解释了，因为在这个这个 C 这一部分它有可能出现 A、B、C、E 这种4个情况，但是这个 A 呢是指的它考的这3个部分是能力相当的 ，B 呢是这个有一个是高于或低于另外2部分 ，C 呢就是大家看到的 ，E 呢就是这个2个部分有2科之间的差分能差到24分以上是它的标准分。这个时候呢就有可能看看这个孩子是不是在学习上是有一些哪些方面需要帮助这个是它一个最大的特点。因为刚才那个报告呢已经过去了，然后呢我就不一一的再把前面这个再进行翻译。另外呢在这补充一点，就是我们 DDC 呢也提供 COGAT 测试这样的话如果大家感兴趣呢也可以在向我们再进行这个咨询哈。So Connie, I added that. So DDC offered the COGAT test. So if the parents and so would like to know more about that, we have also prepared an article to introduce that specifically, and we will share that with them. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Please continue. Thank you.
Oh, yes. Fabulous. Oh, what happened here? There we go. It keeps moving. There. Got it. Okay. All right, let's talk about the academic programming, because using those test scores, that data from the COGAT, can help us understand the best ways to address the academic programming needs of our gifted students. So in those National Alliance for Gifted Children standards, the first one is learning and development, that our educators recognize gifted students' needs and that they allow students to do these things. And there's a huge list, but I really want to emphasize that we recognize the personal strengths and needs. So it kind of goes back to that profile I just showed you. If we see that a student has a quantitative strength or a verbal strength, that's where we want to put our focus. We don't want to put our focus on the negative. We want to put it on the strength, and then we can build the needs from that point. And we find it very, very important for our gifted students that we're allowing them to identify and who they are, that they get to investigate their personal identity along with us. So one of the things that I personally find extraordinarily important in working with gifted students is to give them a sense of power and independence as they're learning. So we want them to have choice throughout their programming. We want them to acknowledge and respect similarities between themselves and others. And we want certainly for them to demonstrate cognitive, but also psychosocial growth as a result of their activities, of what they're doing in school. And another very important piece, I feel, is this identifying future career goals that match their interest and strengths, and also that they start collecting resources to meet those goals. So in terms of the academic classroom opportunities that we have in the United States, almost all of our schools have honors or advanced courses. And again, when I taught in the Gifted Center, we might have students who were taking we didn't expect them to be gifted in every single subject. We allowed them their diversity, and we allowed them to bring their strengths. For example, I was an English teacher, so I often had my students look at literature through the eyes of a mathematician. If they felt very comfortable quantitatively, if numbers made sense to them, then we talked about stories in terms of numbers. Sometimes we even would count the number of times a word appeared on a page, just to sort of keep them engaged and to start connecting with the literature. We often, one of my very common activities was when we would write summaries of a book or plot analysis, I'd say, how would you write this if it were a math problem? And we'd investigate that. So we want to think about those honors and advanced courses are as indicated, but we want to be bringing their strengths in as well. If they have a strong foundation in reading, writing, and math, in the United States, we have advanced placement courses. These tend to have rigorous memorization and analysis, and they can provide college advancement, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. Also, the International Baccalaureate programs, those are, I find those to be, those programs tend to draw my gifted students more than the advanced placement classes. My students who take the advanced placement often feel like it's the rigor of the memorization, but in the International Baccalaureate, they have this theory of knowledge, which brings a creative side into the studies and a connection of all of the different areas that they're learning about. And it is a very rigorous study. Both advanced placement and International Baccalaureate classes are accepted in many colleges in the United States for college credit. I've had a number of students who have completed their first 2 years of college while they were in high school by taking advanced placement courses. International Baccalaureate courses, though, also are recognized internationally. So if a child chooses to go to school in Paris or in Canada, those IB classes tend to be, well, they're recognized there. However, having said that, in both of those cases, private colleges don't always take these credits. And they may, for example, if a student goes to, I'm just going to throw out like Duke University. If a student's studying engineering at Duke University, Duke wants them to learn calculus the way that they want them to learn calculus. And so they'll ask the students to retake it, even though they've gotten the credit for it previously. So that's one of the reasons it's important for students to start thinking about where they want to go to school, or start looking at those before they are picking their high school courses, so that they feel like, I guess, just so they go into it knowing. I would never advise a student not to take an advanced placement or an IB course. It's just, I don't want them to be stunned, or their parents to be stunned when they get accepted to a certain school and that school doesn't accept those credits. And many schools accept many of the credits, so that's important. The students are also allowed in the United States to take concurrent college courses. So in that case, then they are behaving exactly as a college student would be expected to perform academically in a college course. And then that credit is just put onto a transcript and can transfer as it would if they were already enrolled in college. Also, we encourage some of our gifted students to go to technical and career programs because they are extraordinarily creative and ready to get to work right away, and they are not interested in going to college. And we try not to diminish that because many of our technical and career programs are extremely affluent. We have a technical and career program in the district where I taught. We had students working with NASA on space programs. So those are all advanced academic opportunities that we encourage the students to investigate as they move into high school. Also, in Standard 4 on those national standards, we want learning environments that, and I think this is most important, that are fostering a love for learning and that are fostering a sense of personal and social responsibility and multicultural competence and interpersonal as well as technical communication skills. And I think this word leadership is just so important. It doesn't mean that a student has to become an extrovert or an introvert. It means that they have a sense of knowing who they are and what it is that they're acquiring skills because they recognize the value of the skills. So we feel that creating a love for learning includes cognitive, social, physical, managerial, and forward-thinking study. So the cognitive, of course, is the advanced academics as appropriate. We would like to meet students where they are and then move them as far forward as we can. In terms of social, we do a lot of collaborative work in the United States to ensure that that our gifted students are able to communicate their ideas. I have some incredibly gifted students that I've worked with in the past, but it wasn't just because they were introverted, they had a very difficult time just communicating to other people. So we feel that that's a very important piece of their education. We want to keep them physical and physically active so that they're healthy. Managerial, time management, emotional management, materials management, all of those pieces are very important. And so we feel like they need to be integrated into the learning. And then the forward thinking is putting together a portfolio, looking at possible schooling for post-secondary, and talking to people who are in the career fields that they might be interested in. In our center programming, we have GT centers and GT schools all over our country, and we focus on cognitive, physical, emotional, and social needs. And these are some of the programs that that schools will focus on. Some schools focus specifically on the autonomous learner model, which is very much based in student identity and independence and agency. The STEM and STEAM and project learning programs, we have whole schools that are devoted to that. We have arts academies, the early colleges, and the technical schools. So I guess that's the wrap up of that section, is that we can look at any of these, but it's important when we talk about gifted students, we're not just talking about academic needs. We recognize that there's a much broader need for the whole child to develop.
Thank you, Connie.
刚才
Connie 老师呢，就是介绍了一下关于自由生在教育里面它的一些学术项目都包括哪些内容。其实呢，在自由生项目的设计的时候呢，它主要是关注了学生的一个是他的长项，还有他的这个需求是具体是什么。所以说，通过刚才的我们的一个评估和认定，那么回到来就是我们在课程设计过程当中如何满足孩子的这样的一些需求。然后呢，在美国呢，它目前是在中学阶段，它有很多的不同的课程是来满足这些需求的。比如说我们刚才提到的就是像有一些 honors 的课程，还有呢，比如说孩子在阅读写作或者是数学方面比较有突出的这种能力，或者是能力比较强的话，还有比较多的像大家可能听过比较多的像 AP 课程、像 IB 课程这样的也是比较多的。然后另外呢，还有的学生呢是可以在中学阶段他就可以直接这个参加大学课程的这样的学习，然后以后如果去了这个大学，学分是能够进行的转换。另外呢，就比如说这个还有一些就是这个职业技术的一些学习这个呢，因为刚才老师呢也举到一个例子，就是说在他们学区内有一个非常有名的一个职业技术学校这个他在那里面学习的学生，他是跟 NASA 来合作来进行一些研究的项目呢，也是非常非常棒的。另外呢，就是刚才特别提到的一点，就是说像有很多孩子就是学了 AP 以后到大学是能抵学分的，但是呢，这个并不是在美国所有的学校都是这个样子，特别是在这个私立的大学，像刚才举到的杜克大学，如果你想学一些工程类的项目，即便你在学了 AP 的这种微积分的话，你到这个大学里面仍然需要按照他的要求进行进一步的这个学习。另外呢，还有这个学习的这个环境对于自由生也是非常重要的。在给自由生提供这个课程，我相信其实对其他的学生也都是一样的，就是我们不光只看学术，而是呢我们要通过综合来看孩子他的需求，为他创造一个适合他的这样的学习环境。首先第一个就是认知能力的发展，另外呢一个就是他的这个社交的一些需求还有呢就是说保证他身体的健康，比如说有一些户外的项目，还有一个呢是这个 管理的能力。这个管理的能力呢，包括了比如说像时间的管理，像他的这个情绪的管理，以及像他的一些资料的这个管理。还有呢一个呢，就是一个对自己将来今后发展方向的一个提前的思考和研究。比如说他可以跟在这个行业里面比较这个能力比较强，或者是说在这个已经从事到他喜欢职业的人员能够进行沟通，对他将来能够有一个更好的一个规划，这都是学生需要能够关注的这个地方。另外呢一点，就比如说举一个例子，就是说，比如说在孩子的他整个的这个学习的特点，他这个周边的环境要关注到他刚才我们提到的说，让他有一个能够爱学习的环境，然后让他整个的这个周边的社交环境，还有呢在不同的文化下，以及刚才我们提到的这个领导力这些方面，都是孩子们所要关注的。比如说以领导力为例，不是说让孩子们说一定谁都去当一个 lead，而是他到最后是要能够发现他自己是谁，能够理解这种运用这些技巧。其实从前面我们刚才提到这个学术项目，到我们后面所说的这个 leadership，还有包括他的学习环境，其实都是在帮助孩子在如何发挥自己的优势，还有这个长项，以及能够找到他自己是谁和擅长什么。这个是整个自由项目的学术项目的安排的一个主要的考虑。Yeah, that's all for me. Thank you, Connie.
Okay.
So please go
All
ahead.
right. All right. So the last part that I wanted to talk about before questions and answers is the enrichment section. And I know one of the questions that was given to me early was how can we, what kind of courses do we want to direct our non-verbal, the students who score high in non-verbal, how do we want to direct them? And this is often, but not exclusively, this is often a place where our non-verbal students will shine. It can be a place where our verbal and quantitative students can shine too, but our non-verbal students often struggle in their academic classes, but they shine in their extracurricular and enrichments. So we encourage our gifted students to pursue clubs and contests and activities. As a teacher, I always had my students, they had to submit at least one contest entry in something every semester. So every half a school year, they had to do at least one contest. And it was open to whatever, but it might be science fair, or they might do a writing piece that they submitted, or the Google Doodle, which is an art contest, a digital art contest. But these are just some clubs and activities that our schools would have, but that we also encourage our students we strongly encourage them to pursue. And then in terms of extracurricular opportunities, we also encourage private lessons wherever possible. And as I said, economically, we sometimes have problems. So with our underserved students, so we try to find grants and monies for them to get private lessons or to have tutors if they need them. We also try to connect students with field experts whenever we can. We have the museums, for example, in the Denver metro area where I live, have many programs for our gifted students to apply to, and then they can do archaeological digs, or they can do art docenting, or any number of things. And also internship and apprentice programs, if they are available, we encourage our students to follow an expert in a field for a few weeks or a semester or a school year. Also, we strongly encourage our students to begin portfolios ideally no later than grade 9, and that's age 14. And they can make these digital, but we want they can be tangible if they've got pieces that they really want people to see. But a lot of times, like our students who are sculptors or performers, they can put in a video or a photograph of their artwork. And we also encourage senior capstone presentations where the students put together an independent study presentation, and it that highlights their strengths and their highlights over the 4 years of their high school, but it's a culminating project. These portfolios should include photos, work samples, curricula vitae, and resumes. And the one thing I didn't add on here, and I would now, is the syllabi from any classes that they have taken that are considered advanced, because colleges in particular often want to look at those syllabi. So I would include that as well. And then we also encourage the enrichment opportunities over the summers or over spring breaks. Most of the universities in the United States will offer summer programs for gifted students. We have many private gifted centers that even if a student doesn't attend during the regular school year, they might go to a special program for the summer or over spring break. And I sent some students, actually this last year, we had some students who spoke at the World Council for Gifted and Talented. So they enjoy having students attend, but we even had students who spoke there. And then also field specific. ThesCon is a theater organization that has a national conference. We have international technology conferences, young leaders conferences. So we try to get students to at least one conference or workshop every year, and a camp or an internship over the summer if that's possible as they get older. And I think, do you want to summarize that? And I'll do the last thing. This is my closing slide.
Yeah, no problem. So I will
Okay.
just briefly translate what you introduced about the enrichment program.
Okay.
So for the enrichment program, 刚才呢，康妮老师就又介绍了一下，就是关于自由生在他们的一些课外活动和课外发展的时候的一些资源，或者说是一些项目。其中呢就考虑到刚才就融合了刚才之前一个家长提到的问题，就是说如果一个孩子他的 nonverbal 空间演绎能力这个比较强的话，有哪些项目会比较适合他？是这样，一般这个nonverbal 就是这个空间演绎能力比较强的孩子呢，他往往在学术能力上相对弱一点。那其实，在另外一个角度来讲，其实他是在课外的活动，包括像音乐，包括像美术，包括像表演，他一般都会是比较擅长的。那这样的话呢，就是鼓励他能够参加更多的这种俱乐部啊、比赛啊或者活动，就包括像一些乐队，包括一些剧院的项目，包括还有一些科技的一些就是俱乐部，包括科学展，还有电影，包括一些就是这种商赛。另外呢，就是说如果在有条件和有可能的情况下呢，可以给孩子在这方面的特长再补充一些课程啊，找一些专家或者是老师能够给他们。当然，在这个康妮老师所在的学区呢，他们也是尽量的来提供这个。另外呢，就是一般在孩子在9年级，或者说在14岁左右的时候，让他们可以就是按照自己的兴趣进行一些准备，就是比如说可以做一个自己的 portfolio， 然后这样可以是电子的，或者是说是这个可见的，这里面包括他们参加的学习的项目，然后包括他自己的简历，还有包括他自己的这个一些完成项目的图片啊，这个呢也都对这些孩子们是有帮助的。另外呢，还可以在有条件和有机会的情况下参加一些大型的会议，或者是研讨会，或者是营地，这个也是非常有帮助的。在美国呢，它是在不同领域，像在大多数的大学里面，或者是自由生的一些中心里面，都会组织一些这样的活动。像一些这个刚才提到这个 ThesOn， 它是一个关于戏剧方面的这样一个全国的会议，还有就是全球年轻领导力的这样的一个会议，都可以鼓励孩子的去进行学习参加，来提升自己在某一方面的这个特长或者是能力啊，这个是要补充的一点。Okay, so Connie, that is my brief translation. So I believe just now you covered 2 questions. One is about the AMC, the other is about the nonverbal. But so here is the other question. So what do you think would be your suggestion about the academic planning for a regular student? They are not gifted student based on your experience.
Oh, the academic planning for a regular student?
Yeah.
Well, I still feel that so one of the things that I often believe is that, or often express is that if it's good for gifted students, it's good for all students. However, sometimes we need to break things down academically for our not gifted students, and other times we need to break things down for our gifted students. So many of our students who are in advanced placement or even in IB programming or the concurrent college classes are not identified as gifted students. So those programs are still available for students who aren't gifted. And if a student's willing to put in the work, they're going to be able to master the academic rigor. A gifted student is more than just bright. They sometimes have certain struggles with overexcitabilities or emotional regulation or managerial issues. And that's often why they need the extra programming.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
OK， 刚才康妮老师呢也回答到，其实刚才有一个问题，我刚才没有翻译哈，是它其实融合了之前我们一个家长提出来，就说这个考 AMC 对于申请美国的美初和美高是不是有帮助？刚才其实康妮老师也提到了，就是他说如果孩子考过的话，这是非常好的申请的时候一个作为他一个整体的申请材料的一部分，但是呢他不是说它是能够起到一个决定性的作用，放到这个整个的申请里面很好，但是也不要给孩子太大的压力，一定要在 AMC 当中取得多高的成绩，这个不是一个非常必要的一个考试或者是情况。另外呢，刚才补充了另外的一个问题，就是说因为我们今天分享的是自由生的这个项目，之前也跟康宁老师说，这个如果说就是我们孩子没有参加过这样的项目，或者对一个就是普通的孩子，他如何来规划自己的中学的学术，其实刚才老师也提到呢，就是说就是其实适合 gifted 的这些孩子，其实同样也可以适合就是我们其他的这样的孩子，比如说我们的 IB 课程，我们的 AP 课程，其实也是对面向所有的学生提供的，他也可以进行去学习，进行去选择。唯一的一个不同呢，就是在有些项目的选择的时候，我们需要来判断一下，就是自由生也不是什么都好或者什么都会，他有的时候可能有一个情绪控制的问题，他可能有的自由生的孩子他有阅读障碍，这些东西都是有可能的。所以说呢，我们也要看就是这个具体的孩子具体的情况。刚才所提到的这些课程的认定，包括课程的提供，包括这种延伸的学习的这些资源，其实对所有的学生呢，其实是都有这个参考和适用价值的。Yeah, so Connie, I believe there is another question raised before. That is, so as for the language learning, is there any effective way for the ESL learners to move from informal language learner to formal language learner? So I think the question is that, so most of the students in China, for instance, so they study in international schools or private schools. So they only study English in the school, but not at home. And they often start from the oral English, but when it comes to the written, some formal essays writings, they will meet some difficulties. So what do you think it is the best way to improve their formal English language application and acquisition?
Well, thank you for that question. I mean, it's a really good one. I think, first of all, that as the students are learning the informal, if they're learning also to identify elements of the informal language, that's going to make a nice connection for them over. For example, if they learn what a contraction is when they're speaking. So when we say we've or they've or wouldn't, if they can learn as they're learning that informally to identify what that is, then as we move them to the formal language, we can say in formal language, we don't use the contractions. So that's just one example. I think another piece that's just so important is to get the students reading and reading and reading in English. And I think beyond that, and I'll be completely honest, English as a second language is something I've worked with students who are ESL learners, but it's not my area of expertise. But my area of expertise is helping students learn formal language. And I work quite a lot with breaking down sentences, understanding the different parts of sentences, and really just writing and revision, like allowing the students to make mistakes as they're writing and then using that to help them learn what it is that they would do instead for formal, and doing it without being punitive or derogatory, just helping them see in their own work how they can move from the informal to the formal.
Okay, thank you very much. 是刚才呢，康妮老师在回答这个问题的时候，其实在于 informal 和 formal 这个语言的学习里面呢，其实确实 informal 的学习，一般都是口语它的一些获得，但是如果说对于一些就是正式的一些英语的语言的学习呢，还是要靠更多的这种阅读。首先你要知道这个 formal 这个正式的英语是什么，然后这样的话你才能够去能够获得，或者是说才能去提升。除了就是更多的阅读，接触更多的这种正式的英语语言之外呢，其中写作也很重要，就是一定要有一个写和改的过程，这样不断的让孩子能够知道我如何能够写到一个就是更多的使用这个正确的语言。在这个过程当中呢，有的时候比如说分析一个句子，为什么这个句子这么来写，它是一个 formal 的一个语言，然后分析里面的词性也好，包括分析句子结构，这个是对于正式语言的学习来讲也是非常的有帮助的。另外最后一点呢，就是提到就是学生一定要反观自己的写作的作品，就是其实自己的就是更多的是，如果说在 formal language 里面，更多的就是写了，一定要看自己写的东西，它的要不断的回看它的问题在哪儿，我下一步如何提高，然后这样从一个 informal 到 formal 的过程，这样呢才会有帮助。So Connie, so I received several questions from the chat box. So it is in Chinese, so I will translate them for you. So 我们有个家长问到这个 VR 是指的 verbal 吗？是 cognitive verbal 还是 VR？能解释一下这个 VR 吗？因为在刚才咱们在讨论到 COGA 里面是指 verbal，还有 non-verbal 那个，所以说你看您能方便再解释一下吗？我先说这个第二个问题哈。So as for the cognitive ability, Connie, so so is there any particular course after students joining that they can improve their cognitive ability? Or cognitive ability is born or could be fostered after they joining different courses. So so what's your opinion about that?
That's a fabulous question. When I first began working with gifted populations, I would have said that cognitive is strictly innate. It's just something that you're born with. Over time, and teaching in sometimes lower income schools, I have discovered that that is absolutely not the case, and that many of our students, especially by the time they get to secondary and they haven't been identified, their cognitive abilities absolutely can be fostered, and would have been if they probably had lived in a different place or time. And so we can foster those abilities by allowing them to play puzzles, allowing them to play, honestly, but with language, with puzzles, with numbers, and also to pursue curiosity, to do as much as we possibly can to ignite curiosity in our students and ask them why. So oftentimes when students aren't identified, it's because their gifts haven't been fostered. Now, if a child has, everything, every opportunity in the world that's available to him, and he's, he's played puzzles his whole life, and he's pursued curiosity and all of the things, he's gone to museums and art museums and done all of the things, and he's not showing high cognitive scores, we might want to let that go. But if we have a student who just has not had those opportunities of curiosity nurturing and game playing with language and numbers and investigation, then we need those are ways to foster their scores.
Okay, thank you very much. 刚才康丽老师也给解释呢。首先来讲，就是这个就是刚才我们提到的，就是这个包括我们说的自由生，包括我们的认知能力这个的提升呢，它是在后天是可以在某种程度上是被培养的，特别是随着孩子的年龄的增长到中学阶段了以后，但是如何来培养呢？就是说在课程或者是项目的设计上的时候，一定要是跟这个孩子更多的他的能激发他的好奇心，让他愿意更多的问问题，问他更多的 why， 然后呢，还有呢，就是说让他能够 有机会更多的自己去调查研究，充分锻炼他的自己的思考思维的逻辑能力。包括具体的来讲，就比如说在数学或者词汇方面，如果说能够让他能够玩更多的 puzzles，就是各种的这个游戏或者谜题解题，或者让他通过一些做活动的方式来深入学习这个东西，能够进行锻炼。在这个过程当中，这个孩子的认知能力或者说他的 giftedness 会能够进行发展的。当然了，也有很多孩子他有非常强的好奇心，也愿意去研究调查，但最后他总可能会在一些测试里面，包括像 COGAT 的测试没有表现的那么好，但是也没有关系，这个都不关键，就是那就是这样，只要是孩子他能够自己把自己的优势发挥出来，他能够愿意再认真的去学习，这个是最关键的，所以说这个后天是可以能够进行一定培养的。So thank you for our participant Mindy to give more explanation about the I'm sorry, it is verbal reasoning. So so Connie, if if the students performed very high in the verbal reasoning, so what do you think? I mean, the courses or the future career planning might be a better fit for him or her.
The courses that would be a better fit.
Yeah.
Well, our verbal students become extraordinarily writers, but also lawyers. I mean, that is a great career because lawyers are, I mean, in litigation, they have to be quick on their feet. We see journalists, newscasters, reporters are also very, even sportscasters. My goodness, I watched the Olympics last summer and I just thought, my goodness, these people, their ability to just follow a sport so quickly and articulate what was happening. It was just quite remarkable. So those are all fields that I would initially think of. But, even we have some great quantum physicians who also lean toward verbal. And I was actually just reading an article the other day where a quantum physicist was saying that many of the people in his field who are more verbal, who are more about telling the story than they are about doing the quantitative piece of it, are the people who are sort of pushing the idea now of a multiverse, like a whole different possibility of like the origins of the universe. So I mean, verbal can go in any direction, but I mean, my first thought is lawyer or journalist.
OK, thank you very much. 刚才康内老师呢也给了补充，就是说，如果一个孩子在他的这个语言方面他特别突出的话，可能将来以后一些相应的课程或者是职业的发展会比较适合的，比如说是作家，包括像律师是非常重要的，他对语言的这种敏感性和他的逻辑推理能力，还有包括记者，或者是说刚才他举到的一个例子，就是比如说这个体育赛事的这个解说员。还有呢，刚才他提到一个非常有意思的，就是关于一些物理方面的一些研究的这个专家也提到，就是说有的时候，比如说刚研究这个宇宙的起源的时候，当然它有很多的这个科学和数学在后面，当然对那些 verbal 很强的这些这个研究人员或者是学生来讲的话，他们会从不同的角度来去解释、来去看待这些问题，也是一个非常有意思的一个角度。其实就是这个 verbal 它适用的范围还是非常广的。如果说最直接的就是刚才我们所提到的这些内容。Yes. So, Connie, do you know CAT4?
Say it again.
CAT4, CAT4. So it is a cognitive test from Britain. Do you know about that?
I am not familiar with CAT4. I apologize.
Okay. No worries. So I will answer this question later. So I know a little bit more about that. So, but I will let the parents to finish the questions. So particularly for you. So let me see. I noticed also another question. So for the students in the United States, when they're preparing for applying for the schools, the secondary schools like middle school or high schools, how would they improve their language ability? You mean like the vocabulary and things like that?
Well, again, reading is so important, but reading. I would have my students, we would get whole lists of, we made a lot of flashcards and we played
Okay.
a lot of games with flashcards, but
Mhm.
I mean, we played a lot of games with them. And one of the things, and this is a pretty common practice in the United States, is that you can buy books that tell you, like, this is the vocabulary that's on the SAT, and the students just, they learn and they just memorize as many words as they can. When I was teaching high school, even when I attended high school, we had probably 150 cards that we would make every 6 weeks in our college bound classes.
Mhm.
So, and the students would make the cards. Now they can do it digitally, but they would make the cards, and then they would drill each other, and they would just expand their vocabulary that way. I personally find it better to read, but that's not an ineffective way to pick up some of the very specific vocabulary that's on the SAT or the ACT, the college entrance exams.
OK，Thank you very much。刚才康妮老师那个也补充到呢，就是对语言的提升或者词汇量的提升呢，这个当然最有效的还是通过大量的阅读来积累。当然具体的，如果说到词汇的学习的方法呢，他也提到了，比如说在美国，学生们一样也需要考这个 SAT 这样的考试或者 SSAT 这样的考试。那他们现在在用的比较多的就是做那个词汇卡，通过做词汇卡的方式，孩子们就经过自己做，然后呢也可以通过互相提问的方式，这种训练的方式来记忆这些词汇啊。然后这个也是他以前在高中的时候，学生们在使用，也在某种程度上来讲也是比较有效的一种学习的方式。So the next question is that, so do you think it would be a need to learn a second foreign language for a student?
Beyond English?
Yeah.
Well, if they can, that would be fantastic. I will tell you that in the United States, one of the algorithms that most colleges use when they're recruiting a class for their college, they want a student from they want at least one student from every state. Of course, it depends on the size of the school, but they want a percentage of representatives from every state in the country, but then they want a representative from every continent in the world, and they want within those continents, then they want some diversity as well. So, I mean, just by nature of being a Chinese student coming to the United States and who already speaks English, that's going to be a huge advantage for a student. But of course, as many languages as a person can learn would be fabulous. So, and once you start the Latin languages, I mean, once you have French or Spanish sort of mastered, then the other French or Spanish or Italian, they sort of they have such a common base that it's easy to pick up. If you pick up one, you can pick up 3 pretty easily.
Yeah, thank you. 是这样，就刚才说的，如果说学生有有时间有余力的话，他当然学习2外还是比较有帮助的。但是有一个信息，就是在美国很多的大学里面，他在招生的时候，他会考虑到这个来自渠道的或地域的多元性。比如说，他要招美国本土学生的时候，他会尽量照顾到每个州有一个。当然，他要看这个班或者这个专业有多大哈。然后呢，对国际学生来讲呢，他要考虑到来自不同的大洲，这个也是他们会去来考虑的。当然，在学语言的方面呢，它也有一些语言的特点，比如说你像学这个比如说像印欧语系的这些语言，如果说学一个，可能在学到另外一个的时候，也会包括拉丁语、包括法语这些，他们是就是它的来源是一样的，可能会更容易一点，是这样的一个情况啊。So the next question is, so one of the students performed very high in nonverbal and also on math, on quantitative. Both the percentile are both above 95 percentile. But I don't know, he or she got the 9E in the ability profile. Wow. So I believe it is about the verbal, because both so the quantitative and the nonverbal is above 95 percentile. If it is a E, it means that the verbal is very low. and at least 24 points. You know,
Yes.
yes. So in terms of this, so what do you think the future, you know, college majors would the students pursue in the future would benefit for him or her?
I would suggest anything in design or STEM, so science, technology, engineering, arts, or math. But students who are nonverbal often are very spatially aware, and studying something like architecture or magazine design or not computer programming per se, but computer graphic design, I guess, is what I was thinking. And sometimes even engineering, particularly with that quantitative supplement, you know, with that quantitative strength as well. So those would be the areas that I would definitely lean towards STEM if that were my child.
Okay, thank you, Connie. So so the suggested areas 刚才呢就是 Connie 老师也给到了，就比如说像nonverbal 和数学都是95以上，但是也是91的这种情况。将来在专业选择上呢，他建议的就是更多的可以是跟科学、工程这个类的这样的，比如说特别是要发挥他在空间想象能力的这种提升，包括还有其他的专业，比如说像这个杂志设计，包括像建筑。包括还有就是比如说计算机设计这些东西都还是一个比较适合他的一个方向。Yeah. Okay. So the parent added one more. So you know for the I mean the SAS, the standard age score is 155 for nonverbal, so pretty high because the total score is 160, and the verbal is 125. I think it is, yeah.
That's very high.
Yeah, still it is very high. So yeah, no problem about that.
Right. So it's important to remember on that SAS, 100 is the mean. So anything over 120 is considered statistically significant in terms of high.
Okay, thank you very much. 就是说，刚才我们虽然您的这个是显示90，但是这是一个在一个非常高的水平上面的不同学科之间的差异。那 nonverbal 满分160至155，这是非常高的，而且呢，就是100分是一个平均水平啊，超过这个以上呢，就是说在平均水平以上，超过120的话，就说明已经是在一个 high level 上面了啊。对，再补充这一点。然后我借这个机会呢，再回答一个刚才有一个家长问的一个问题，是关于 Cant4 和 COGAT 的区别。他俩呢这个区别，其实我们之前问过 COGAT，其实他俩的这个区别，我其实让 COGAT 让他们给我们出一个对照表，不知道他们做没做哈。但是有一条是 COGAT 不是 Cant4 当 COGAT 在前面 ，COGAT 是1968年开始。做的有50多年的历史，后来呢 Cant4 是他 base 在英国，然后后来他到 COGAT 买了一部分的题，然后在这个基础上他进行了加工，自己的研发，形成了就是2个其实都是认知能力测试，但是一个是英国，一个是美国，他俩就是跟他们的这个就是跟美国吧，我们主要是跟 COGAT 聊，他说应该是非常非常相似的，就是没有什么本质性上的区别，只是可能在一些题型啊一些方面呢，然后进行分类有一些调整啊。这个是这个的区别。另外呢，还有一个私信我的问题，就问说 DDC 的 program 是不是 enrich program？这个呢，其实我觉得可以分为2部分，我们可以分为2个部分。我们有一部分是 enrichment program，你比如说像我们的数学小学低年级的课。它是这个我们用的是 PM-Cube，它这个呢就是当时设计的时候就是为了一个延伸的学习。那包括语言这个你很难讲，它是这个语言我们用的 Michael Clay Thompson 也应该算 enrichment， 因为它不是学校传统使用的这个项目啊。然后包括像 AOPS， 我们数学高年级使用的，它是这个，因为我们跟我们的老师在交流的时候，其实它也是覆盖了学生在学校学期本身要覆盖的概念，但是它给的例子和教学的方法是不太一样的。这个我们也可以很难说严格，他说他是这个，其实它属于一个 enrich program， 但是它跟学校的这个课程安排的更加的紧密。那你比如说像科学和 STEM 的课程肯定 STEM 和 Arts 肯定是属于 enrichment program， 但是这个 Science 我们的课程都是根据美国的新一代科学教育标准所进行设计的，而美国的课程不管是用什么样的 textbooks 还是 curriculum， 它其实也是 follow 这个 structure， 只不过是方式上会有一些不同和差异。 那你比如说我们到了高年级，我们的有一部分的 AP 课程或者 IGCSE 课程，其实就跟学校的这个项目就比较接近了啊，就是可能还得具体看，不同的课程体系、不同的课程它还是不太一样。但是整体来说，我们 DDC 还是做的是 enrichment program。就是因为好多，比如说有些知识，孩子们在学校都已经学过了，我们呢就是我们是 gifted program，然后在这个基础上，把更复杂、更难、更有挑战的这样的一些课程提供出来，给到我们适合的孩子啊。是我回答一下刚才那个问题。